At least I had the page saved. What are you getting so upset about?
I don't know.
Don't. Nani.
Yeah, it's my little sister. She don't like her face to be on YouTube. Last time I tried to record her, she started running away. So I deleted that video.
Can I get this chapter read?
Yeah. We got a new person today. What?
He doesn't talk much and he doesn't let his face be shown, but he's here.
Yeah. Talk.
Hey.
Hey,
Who's this? Yeah. Would you stop trying to turn the camera?
I showed your face that shoot. I'm not gonna play Dead Space. It's scary. Carson shows. No, he doesn't.
23. In the playground. Jack came out onto the porch, tugging the tab of his zipper up under his chin, blinking in the bright air. In his left hand, he was holding a battery-powered hedge clipper. He tugged a fresh handkerchief out of his back pocket with his right hand, swiped his lips with it, and tucked it away. Snow, they had said on the radio. It was hard to believe, even though he could see the clouds building up on the far horizon. He started down the path to the topiary, switching the hedge clipper over to the other hand. Sorry. It wouldn't be a long job, he thought. A little touch-up would do it. Sorry. The cold nights had surely stunted their growth. The rabbit's ears looked a little fuzzy, and two of the dog's legs had grown fuzzy green bone spurs. But the lions and the buffalo looked fine. Just a little haircut would do the trick, and then let the snow come. The concrete path ended as abruptly as a diving board. He stepped off of it and walked past a drained pool to the gravel path which wound through the hedge sculptures and into the playground itself. He walked over to the rabbit and pushed the button on the handle of the clippers. It hummed into quiet life. "Hi, Brer Rabbit," Jack said. "How are you today? A little off the top and get some of the extra off your ears? Fine. Say, did you hear the one about the traveling salesman and the old lady with her pet poodle?" His voice sounded unnatural and stupid in his ears, and he stopped. It occurred to him that he didn't care much for these hedge animals. It had always seemed slightly perverted to him to clip and torture a plain old hedge into something that it wasn't.
I don't want your germs. I don't want your germs, no.
I don't want your germs.
Shut your face! What is that? It's PlayStation Home.
PlayStation Home.
Oh, no.
It had always seemed slightly perverted to him to clip and torture a plain old hedge into something that it wasn't. Along one of the highways in Vermont, there had been a hedge billboard on a high slope overlooking the road, advertising some kind of ice cream, making natural pedal ice cream. That was just wrong. It was grotesque. You weren't hired to philosophize, Torrance.
No.
Ah, that was true. Just get up and get it. He's not going to do it for you.
Hey, Granny, go get me something to drink.
Get up. Ah, that was true. So true. He clipped along the rabbit's ears, brushing a small litter of sticks and twigs off onto the grass. The hedge clipper hummed in that low and rather disgustingly metallic way that all battery-powered appliances seem to have. The sun was brilliant, but it held no warmth, and now it wasn't so hard to believe that snow was coming. Working quickly, knowing that to stop and think when you were at this kind of task usually meant making a mistake. Jack touched up the rabbit's face. Up this close it didn't look like a face at all, but he knew that at a distance of 20 paces or so, light and shadow would seem to suggest one. That in the viewer's imagination. And then zipped the clippers along its belly. That done, he shut the clippers off, walked down toward the playground, and then turned back abruptly to get it all at once. The entire rabbit. Yes, it looked all right. well, he would do the dog next. But if it was my hotel, he said, I'd cut the whole bunch of you down. He would too. Just cut 'em down and resawed the lawn where they'd been and put in half a dozen small metal tables with gaily colored umbrellas. People could have cocktails on the overlooked lawn in the summer sun, slow gin fizzes and margaritas and pink ladies and all those sweet tourist drinks. A rum and tonic, maybe. Jack took his handkerchief out of his back pocket and slowly rubbed his lips with it. Come on, he said softly. This is nothing to be thinking about. He was going to start back, then some impulse made him change his mind and he went down to the playground instead. I heard some. Better. It was funny how you never knew kids, he thought. He and Wendy had expected Danny would love the playground. It had everything a kid could want. But Jack didn't think the boy had been down half a dozen times, if that. He supposed if there had been another kid to play with, it would have been different. The gate squeaked slightly as he let himself in, and then there was crushed gravel crunching under his feet. He went first to the playhouse, a perfect scale model of the overlook itself. It came up to his lower thigh, just about Danny's height when he was standing up.
So wait until I get those.
Why are you kicking? What are you doing? Why are you in the box? What are you doing?
So you can record.
It's not like we haven't interrupted it 5,000 times during chat. Ashton, what are you looking for? Then stand up. Jack hunkered down and looked into the third floor windows. The giant has come to eat you all up in your beds, he said hollowly. Kiss your AAA rating goodbye. But that wasn't funny either. You could open the house simply by pulling it apart. It opened on a hidden hinge. The inside was a disappointment. What? What? Right where? It's a spot on my arm. It's probably a pimple. I'm gonna poke it.
No.
The inside was a disappointment. The walls were painted, but cover your mouth when you cough, please. I don't want your germs, and I'm sure he doesn't either.
How funny that.
The walls were painted, but the place was mostly hollow. But of course it would have to be, he told himself. Or how else could the kids get inside? What play furniture might go with the place in the summer? Was gone, probably packed away in the equipment shed. He closed it up and heard the small click as the latch closed. He walked over to the slide, set the hedge clipper down, and after a glance back at the driveway to make sure Wendy and Danny had returned, he climbed to the top and sat down. This was a big kid slide, but the fit was still uncomfortably tight for his grown-up butt. How long had it been since he'd been on a slide? 20 years? It didn't seem possible that it could be that long. It didn't feel that long, but it had to be that or more. He could remember his old man taking him to the park in Berlin when he had been Danny's age. And he had done the whole bit. Slides, swings, teeter-totters, everything. He and the old man would have a hot dog lunch and buy peanuts from the man with a card afterward. They would sit on a bench to eat them, and dusky clouds of pigeons would flock around their feet. Scavenger birds, his dad would say. Don't you feed 'em, Jackie. But they would both end up feeding them and giggling at the way they ran after the nuts. The greedy way they ran after the nuts. Jack didn't think the old man had ever taken his brothers to the park. Jack had been his favorite, and even so, Jack had taken his lumps when the old man was drunk, which was a lot of time. But Jack had loved him for as long as he was able, long after the rest of the family could only hate and fear it. He pushed off with his hands and went to the bottom, but the trip was unsatisfying. The slide, unused, had too much friction, and no really pleasant speed could be built up, and his butt was just too big. His adult feet thumped into the slight dip where thousands of children's feet had landed before. He stood up, brushed at the seat of his pants, and looked at the hedge clipper. Yeah, he wants it. Go get it for him.
Yeah, he needs to shut.
They're gonna open it back up anyway. And looked at the hedge clipper, but instead of going back to it, he went to the swings, which were also a disappointment. The chains had built up rust since the close of the season, and they squealed like things in pain. Jack promised himself he would oil them in the spring. You better stop it, he advised himself. You're not a kid anymore. You don't need this place to prove it. But he went on to the cement rings. They were too small for him, and he passed them up. And then there's the security fence, which marked the edge of the grounds. He curled his fingers through the links and looked through them, the sun cross-hatching shadow lines on his face like a man behind bars. He recognized the similarity himself, and he shook the chain link, put on a harried expression on his face, and whispered, "Let me out of here! Let me out of here!" But for the third time, not funny. It was time to get back to work. That was when he heard the sound behind him. He turned around quickly, frowning, embarrassed, wondering if someone had seen him fooling around down here in Kitty Country. What? Yes, sir. I will. I'm paying attention.
She said after you finish. And you're really interrupting.
You're interrupting too. He was done until you had to talk. He turned around quickly, frowning, embarrassed, wondering if someone had seen him fooling around down here in Kitty Country. His eyes ticked off the slides, the opposing angles of the seesaws, the swings in which only the wind sat. Beyond all that, to the gate and the low fence that divided the playground from the lawn and the topiary. The lions gathered protectively around the path. The rabbit bent over as if to crop grass. The buffalo ready to charge, the crouching dog. Beyond them, the putting green and the hotel itself. From here he could even see the raised lip of the Roque Court on the overlook's western side. It's either Roque or Roque, so I'm going to go with Roque. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Everything was just as it had been, so why had the flesh of his face and hands begun to creep? And why the hair along the back of his neck begun to stand up, as if the flesh back there had suddenly tightened? He squinted at the hotel again, but that was no answer. He simply stood there, its windows dark, a tiny thread of smoke curling from the chimney, coning from the banked fire in the lobby. "Buster, you better get going, or they're going to come back and wonder if you were doing anything all the while." "Sure, get going." Because the snow was coming and he had to get the hedges trimmed. It was part of the agreement. Besides, they wouldn't dare. Who wouldn't? What wouldn't? Dare do what? He began to walk back toward the hedge clipper at the foot of the big kid slide, and the sound of his feet crunching on the crushed stone seemed abnormally loud. Now the flesh on his testicles had begun to creep too, and his buttocks felt hard and heavy like stone. What is this? He stopped by the hedge clipper, but made no move to pick it up. Yes, there was something different in the topiary, and it was so simple, so easy to see that he just wasn't picking it up. Come on, he scolded himself. You just trimmed the rabbits, so what's the... That's it. His breath stopped in his throat. The rabbit was down on all fours, cropping grass. Its belly was against the ground, but not 10 minutes ago it had been up on its hind legs. Of course it had been. He had trimmed its ears and its belly. His eyes darted to the dog. When he had come down the path it had been sitting up as if begging for a sweet. Now it was crouched, head tilted, the clipped wedge of mouth seeming to snarl silently. And the lions. Oh no, baby, oh no, no way. The lions were closer to the path. The two of his right had subtly changed can't speak. Subtly changed positions had drawn closer together. The tail of the one on the left now almost jutted out over the path. When he had come past him and through the gate, the lion that had been on the right, that lion had been on the right, and he was quite sure its tail had been curled around it. They were no longer protecting the path, they were blocking it. Jack put his hand suddenly over his eyes and then took it away. The picture didn't change. The soft sigh, too quiet to be a groan, escaped him. In his drinking days he had always been afraid of something like this happening. But when you were a heavy drinker you called it the DTs. Good old Ray Milland in Lost Weekend seeing the bugs coming out of the walls. What did you call it when you were cold sober? The question was meant to be rhetorical, but his mind answered it. You call it insanity. Nevertheless. Staring at the hedge animals, he realized something had changed while he had his hand over his eyes. The dog had moved closer. It seemed to be in a running posture. Haunches flexed, one front leg forward, the other back. The hedge mouth yawned wider, the pruned sticks looking sharp and vicious. And now he fancied he could see faint indentations in the greenery as well, looking at him. Why do they have to be trimmed, he thought hysterically. They're perfect. Another soft sound. He involuntarily backed a step when he looked at the lines. One of the two on the right seemed to have drawn slightly ahead of the other. Its eyes was lowered. One paw had stolen almost all the way to the low fence. What next? Next it leaps over and gobbles yelps like something in an evil nursery fable. It was like the game they had played when they were kids, Red Light. One person was it, and while he turned his back and counted 10, the other players crept forward. When it got to 10, he whirled around, and if he caught anyone moving, they were out of the game. The others remained frozen in statue postures. Excuse me while I beat Rose.
Done.
No, I've got a page and a half left. Until it turned his back and counted again. They got closer and closer, and at last, somewhere between 5 and 10, you would feel a hand on your back. Gravel rattled on the path. Got a bug on me. Oops. I did it. He jerked his head around to look at the dog, and it was halfway down the pathway, just behind the lions now, its mouth wide and yawning. Before it had only been a hedge clipped in the general shape of a dog, something that lost all definition when you got up close to it. But now Jack could see that it had been clipped to look like a German shepherd, and shepherds could be mean. You could train shepherds to kill. A low rustling sound. The lion on the left had advanced all the way to the fence now. Its muzzle was touching the boards. It seemed to be grinning at him. Jack backed up another 2 steps. His head was thudding crazily, and he could feel the dry rasp of his breath in his throat. Like this. It's an aggressive door opener.
Well, I got a handful of food here.
Close.
Oh my gosh. If that were me in there, I would die.
She can't hear you.
Whoa.
Go on. A low rustling sound. The lion on the left had advanced all the way to the fence now. Its muzzle was touching the boards. It seemed to be grinning at him. I already read this. I'm sorry. Now the buffalo had moved, circling to the right behind him and around the rabbit. The head was lowered and the green hedge horns pointing at him. The thing was, you couldn't watch all of them. Not all at once. He began to make a whining sound, unaware in his locked concentration that he was making any sound at all. His eyes darted from one hedge creature to the next, trying to see them move. The wind gusted, making a hungry rattling sound in the closed matted branches. What kind of sound would there be if they got him? But of course he knew. A snapping, rending, breaking sound. It would be, no, 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 I will not believe this, not at all. He clapped his hands over his eyes, clutching at his hair, his forehead, his throbbing temples. And then he stood like that for a long time, dread building, until he could stand it no longer, and he pulled his hands away with a cry. By the pudding green, the dog was sitting up as if begging for a scrap. The buffalo was gazing with disinterest back toward the rope cord, as it had been when Jack had come down with the clippers. The rabbit stood on its hind legs, ears up to catch the faintest sound, freshly cooked, belly exposed. The lions, rooted in place, stood beside the path. He stood frozen for a long time, the harsh breath in his throat finally slowing. He reached for his cigarettes and shook four out onto the gravel. He stooped down and picked them up, groped for them, never taking his eyes from the topiary for fear the animals would begin to move again. He picked them up, stuffed three carelessly back into the pack, and lit the fourth. After two deep drags, he dropped it and crushed it out. He went to the hedge clipper and picked it up. I'm very tired, he said, and now it seemed okay to talk out loud. It didn't seem crazy at all. I've been under strain, the wasps, the play, alcohol in me, but it's alright. He began to trudge back up to the hotel. Part of his mind tugged fretfully at him, trying to make him detour around the hedge animals, but he went directly up the gravel path through them. A faint breeze rattled through them, that was all. He had imagined the whole thing. He had had a bad scare, but it was over now. In the Overlook's kitchen, he paused to take two Excedrin, and then went downstairs and looked at the papers until he heard the dim sound of the hotel truck rattling into the driveway. He went up to meet them. He felt all right. He saw no need to mention his hallucination. He'd had a bad scare, but it was over now. So that was a slightly longer 23, despite it being a shorter chapter.
Please subscribe to these videos.
Subscribe, not upscribe.
Then subscribe.
No.
Somebody who said so.
Enunciation. That was chapter 23. I hope you enjoyed. I know there's tons of interruptions throughout every chapter, whether it's us two or whether it's just other people on the outside. There's always going to be interruptions. I'm sorry. I don't live alone. If you enjoy it, keep watching. If you don't, you don't have to watch it. Buy the book. Read the book. Read the book. Buy the book. Read the book. If you don't like my read through, you can buy the book and read the book yourself. You could probably read it faster than I can put out these videos anymore. Alright, peace guys. I love you.
Love all you viewers that subscribe and make sure you